Hello, everyone, and welcome to the All Things Watched official podcast, where we talk all things movies, television, streaming, and everything in between. And if you're watching this, then in this video, then we are going to be talking about a movie which actually came out last year. I believe it was around roughly October or November, I think it was, and it came out on Netflix, and it was called Nowhere. And Nowhere, a very interesting fact, if you don't know, actually it came out in September now, I just seen the date. It came out in September 29th, 2023. And for those of you who do not know, Nowhere was actually the number 2 most watched Netflix series of all time. It came in with 83.7 million views and accumulated over 152 million hours worth of viewing. So that's crazy. 152 million watch hours went towards this one movie, and it ranks as Netflix's second most watched non-English movie, because this is a foreign movie. It's done over in Spain. It is a Spain Netflix original and mainly stars Ana Castillo. Now, there are a few other characters and actors in there as well. Tony Corvello, who portrays basically the antagonist or the leader of the regime, who has basically taken over Spain and created this authoritarianism form of government over there, and they're just kind of really hurting women, and especially pregnant women and even children. There's actually a scene in this movie when he literally kills a child and whatnot. And of course, Tamar Novas is in this movie as well, and he portrays Mia's husband. His name is Nico, so he is in the movie a little bit more, say, than Tony, but still very little. But he's sort of sprinkled throughout the movie. They do have, there are some scenes, sort of later on in the movie, in which him and Mia, and of course Mia is betrayed by Ana Castillo, but there are scenes eventually when him and Mia are able to communicate through a cellular mobile device or a cell phone and whatnot. And honestly, this movie, for me at least, was just for me, this actually comes in as my number 1 favorite movie of 2023. Now, don't get me wrong, there's some great movies that came out in 2023 that I'm sure most people would probably put above this one. You got movies like The Covenant by Jake Gyllenhaal. You got Oppenheimer by Christopher Nolan. You got all these amazing, great movies. But for me, on a personal level, all these things are subjective. But for me, I thought that Nowhere was my favorite just because of how small and well-grounded it was. Also, the fact that it didn't really come from Hollywood. It's a Netflix small sort of independent film from Spain. And all the performances and even the story I thought were done really well, and I really thought this movie was compelling. I did. So in this podcast, we are going to be basically doing a scene-by-scene breakdown. We'll talk about everything that happens throughout the entire movie, and we'll talk about our thoughts and opinions, things that we did like, things that we didn't like, things that we thought were realistic, maybe some things that we thought were not realistic. And also, and at the end of the podcast, I'm even going to talk about how I would like to see a sequel to this movie. And I'm sure you're probably thinking to yourself right now, well, how on earth could there be a sequel? Well, just keep listening and stay tuned till the end of the podcast, and I'll explain what I think that sequel should be, and maybe even what it should be called. So let's just go right ahead and jump into our scene by scene breakdown of the movie. Also, I do want to let you guys know as well, if you're interested in watching this movie with me, you can do so over on our Patreon. I only started uploading to Patreon 2 days ago. We already have the 2 episodes of True Detective Night Country. We already have the entire series of Echo, all 5 episodes. And now also we have this movie, Nowhere, a watch-along reaction video that you can watch over there as well. And it's only $2.50. If you're American, it's only $2.50, and there's only one single tier. So if you unlock that one tier, you have access to everything. So, with that being said, let's go right ahead and jump into our scene-by-scene breakdown of the Netflix original Spanish movie, mainly starring Ana Castillo, called Nowhere. So the movie opens in a very chaotic state, and that is, of course, as we already said, Spain is sort of in chaos now. The regime leader known as Gil, who's portrayed by Tony Corvello, has taken over Spain, and he's really using these very brutal tactics where he's actually hurting children, women, and pregnant women. It seems like he's targeting women and pregnant women the most. And and so this obviously leads to a very hostile environment, and this is where we are introduced to our two main characters, but really one main character, Mia and Nico. And Mia and Nico, of course, are a couple, and Mia is pregnant. And when I say pregnant, I mean literally she's about to give birth. In fact, she does give birth during this movie, and she does do it when she's out in the middle of nowhere, floating around in a sea container, but we'll get to that. And so we see Nico sort of, running around, and he's holding onto Mia's hand, sort of guiding her. They're going through almost like this maze of sea cans or sea containers, and they're basically just trying to get away from this regime who's hunting them down and hunting people down and killing them. And also, this regime is there. The 18-wheeler, before it actually gets loaded or checks. Sorry, he stops the 18-wheeler and does a check on the sea can that it's towing before it gets loaded onto the boat. And one thing that I really liked about this sequence was I really liked how smart the writing was, because they could have went two different directions. They could have went one direction where it was just stupid and Gil looks in and doesn't see anything and then leaves, but they didn't. Instead, they choose to show that Gil is actually very intelligent and that he is not a stranger to having to face people trying to be smuggled out. Because what he does something very smart. He sends one of his friends in, they walk right to the very end of the container, and they shoot a bullet out through the side of the container while Gil himself is standing outside, and then he is able to see where the bullet comes through, and then he's able to see that there's actually, another additional probably 6, 8, maybe even 10 feet to the sea container, and so he knows that in that little gap, that is where the people are being smuggled. And so I really liked the writing in that sequence. I thought that was, honestly, I actually thought that was very genius. And little details like that might not seem like it's a big deal, but that's, little details like that is why I decided to make Nowhere my number one favorite movie of 2023. Is because it's not just because it's a really entertaining movie. There's more to it than that. It's a combination of a lot of things. It's the performance, it's the writing, it's the editing, it's the so anyways, Gil cleans it up, and while she's out at sea on this one night, they ends up having a very stormy night, and of course her sea can ends up falling into the water and ends up starting to float, but she knows that over time the sea can is going to sink, so it really gives you almost this ominous, like almost like Titanic type feeling, because you know that there's no way that her sea can keep floating. It is sinking, and it is sinking a little bit every single day. But while the sea can falls into the water, we do get some really cool visuals, a really nice, and I thought very well done, very well edited slow motion scene. Slow motion is not always an easy thing to capulate. Sometimes slow motion can be done really good, and sometimes slow motion can be done really bad. It really depends on how they utilize slow motion, and I really liked it in this scene because it really showed, to me, it really affected the emotion a little bit, and they didn't overuse it either. It was only for like 1 or probably like 5 seconds in total, maybe not even, but they slowed down the one scene with her falling and everything falling, excuse me, and then everything goes black. And I thought that it was also a great way to use special effects without having to use too many special effects, if that makes sense. And so, anyways, she ends up, her sea container ends up in the water, and and so, you can tell that she's a little beaten and a little battered, which she would be. If you're inside of a sea container and it's, sort of, kind of, tossing and turning, you're going to get a little beaten and battered. That's just the way it is, right? And so she ends up, but she ends up surviving, of course, and her sea container is floating, but like I said, it is full of bullet holes and whatnot, and so she is, she does know that she's going to run out of time, so she starts to sort of look through all the different wooden crates to see what she has in there with her, see what she can use and utilize. But they do have one scene which was very horrific, and what I really liked about that scene, though, was the fact that they did it during the daytime. Like, it wasn't at night, it wasn't during a storm. They allowed that scene to occur during the daytime, and I think that made it even more, maybe even a little bit more horrific. But when she's out there floating around, there's actually a whole bunch of other sea cans out there with her, and you can hear other people in the other sea cans, and there's one sea can in particular that's really close to her, and it's actually sinking, and you can hear how many people are in that sea can, and they are all going down and sinking, and you know that they're not going to survive. They are all going to drown, and they really allow that scene to breathe, and they really let that scene just just sort of play out, and you get this really long scene of hearing of audio. You don't see the people, but you do see their sea cam because you see it from Mia's perspective, and you just hear them going down, and they're all going to drown, and it was just so it was almost hard to watch that. It was like, imagine watching fellow people of your community, people who had just went through this war torn country like you have, and they've been trying to escape, and then all of a sudden you and your sea container and their sea container falls into the water, but yours ends up staying afloat, but they're not so lucky, and then they're just sinking, and you hear their screams, but also at the same time thinking in the back of your mind, how long is it going to be before this happens to me? Because she knows, Mia is not dumb. She knows that this is going to happen to her as well, and so once she is very stormy outside, but I liked how they were able to sort of capulate the storm on the inside, because even though she's inside and she's technically protected from the weather, she is inside of a sea can, which is in the water, and the sea can is being forced back and forth. It's very rough, so it's almost like she herself is in a boat, and it's almost like she is also outside in the storm because the water is splashing all around. It's really it's almost like it's raining inside, and you still see all the lightning because she still has all like the holes, from the bullet holes and whatnot, and the peak holes, and so the water is still coming in, and she's still able to see the lightning. And so it's like, I just thought it was really cool how they were able to show how bad the weather was inside the container, even though she wasn't outside. They were still able to show us how bad it was outside because of the stuff that was happening on the inside. So I thought that was really creative too. And we end up getting an absolute, very graphic, very detailed water birth because of all this trauma and everything that she's been through. This causes her to go into labor, which I thought was also a nice little touch as well, because I do think that if you went through that much stress, that much trauma, I do think that this would force a woman into labor. This would definitely induce someone into labor, and that's exactly what happens. And so she ends up giving birth, but she does it in basically what seems to be, I guess you would say that she basically ends up giving a water birth, where you give birth to a child in water, and she's standing up as well, and so that's how she ends up giving birth to her little baby. And so that scene is very graphic. If you're a child or you're someone who's not of age, then definitely don't watch this movie. There is a very graphic, gory scene of childbirth. It's a very realistic water birth scene. They even go as far as showing like the placenta and stuff afterwards. And this Netflix really don't hold back with this movie. The writers and the directors, the creative team, they don't hold back. They show you everything, and for the most part, they answer every question that you might have as to how somebody would survive out here in these conditions and whatnot. So anyways, she gives birth to the baby. But there does be a little bit of complications with the baby. First and foremost, one complication is that she's exhausted and whatnot, and so it actually makes her like throw up and stuff. So I like just little details like that. I really appreciate it. But while she's off on the sea can, during this beautiful sunny day, after trying to spear the fish, after throwing up, she notices a plane going overhead. So she runs down back into the food, not into the food container, but back into the sea can, I'm trying to say, and she cracks off a piece of glass, and she's going to try to signal this airplane by using the glass in the sun. Now, this was something that I thought, like, sure, it was a good idea. I do appreciate the fact that she was smart enough to come up with this idea. I was able to appreciate that, but I was also kind of like, well, I just don't believe that an airplane would ever actually see it. She's just a little tiny dot out in the middle of this ginormous ocean, and so fortunately they didn't go that route, which I was really happy about. But I did appreciate the fact that they would allow her to at least come up with that idea, because I do believe that she would have came up with that idea because of how intelligent she is. She was very creative. She was able to utilize all the different products and stuff that were in the sea can. Sorry folks, I had to take a drink there for a second. But she was able to utilize it all, and I was really, really appreciated seeing her getting creative with all these different products. But unfortunately, this time around, once again, we get a very gory scene because when she's racing up to the top of the sea can with the glass to try to signal these overhead planes and whatnot, if a plane flies by, she wants to signal them and whatnot. She ends up cutting her hamstring and whatnot, which ends up like just putting a huge gash right up her leg, which then causes another problem because now she needs to deal with that so that she doesn't bleed to death and so that she doesn't get blood all over the inside of the container and whatnot. Once again, sanitary reasons and whatnot. She doesn't want her cut to get infected and whatnot. Now, on the bright side, I think one thing that she did have going for her is that she was able to find a little bit of alcohol inside the food container, but also she's surrounded by salt water. So, if push really come to shove, I know salt water, when you just take it out of the ocean, it might not necessarily be clean, but I do think that it will be better than nothing at all. There is still salt in the water, and salt is a sterilizer and a preserver, and also a great way of healing stuff. Oftentimes, if you have surgery and stuff, they'll oftentimes use saline, which is really just salt water, to sort of disinfect the cut, and also to sort of dab onto the cut, because whenever you have a really deep cut, like they recommend you not to get it wet, but they will sort of, make it wet at first just to sterilize it and get everything out of it. So I do think that she had that to her advantage, the fact that she was surrounded by salt water. So but watching that scene, how they filmed that scene, it was so graphic, really hard to watch. It also showed how realistic it is. The fact that she's very disoriented. Once again going back to the malnutrition. But it was really cool to see that, and it was really hard to watch because it was absolutely brutal. She really tears up her leg back here, and then of course now that's a new problem that she now needs to face. And so she handles this problem by sanitizing the cut with the alcohol that she had found, and then she uses the little tiny small audio wires that were inside of the headphones. If anyone knows anything about audio or headphones, you know how small the wires are inside of the headphones. And so this is what she used. She used these little tiny wires as stitches, and she was able to put it through. And she did a really great job at performing the pain as well. You can really see in her face that this was legitimately painful, and she almost passes out a couple times from the pain. So I really liked how they utilized that and whatnot. And so once she gets all that healed up, she continues. Once she gets her leg fixed up, she then decides to use the some more of those wires again to try and create a fishing net. So now she's once again getting very creative with these wires. So that's, I think, the first little bit of hope that she gets, that maybe she could actually survive. And then another little scene here that happens, which was a little far-fetched, but I was able to look past it anyways. But it was a little far-fetched, was that she ends up getting a phone call from Nico, and Nico ends up telling her that he's not going to make it. He was shot, he was killed, he was captured or whatnot. They found him, and he is going to die, and he's not going to make it. So it was a really hard to watch scene, really sad and really beautiful. But I guess then again, on the other hand, if she really is drifting towards shore, maybe she would start to get a signal now. So maybe I could look past that a little bit. Maybe she is getting closer to land, so maybe she would pick up signal. I doubt it, but you never know. Maybe she would. I'm not really 100% sure how that works. But either way, she ends up talking to Nico, and this is basically Nico's final farewell and final goodbye. And this is where I was saying earlier in the podcast, I would love to see a sequel to this movie, and rather than calling it Nowhere, I think they should call it Somewhere, and it would be all about Nico, and we would see his perspective of everything, and then allow his story to end with him making that phone call and talking to her. And they could even, just reuse this scene and just caught back to her, and I would think that that was so cool. Or actually no, I would not want to see that. I would rather see it all from his perspective, and I just thought that that would be so cool if we could see an entire movie and they called it Somewhere, and it was all about him because he's somewhere, and whatnot. And then maybe even do a third movie where we see what happens to what happens to what happens to Mia overall, and maybe have it so that it's a few years later, Mia's a little older, her child is a little older, and maybe that they could be sort of create like sort of a rebellion or something to sort of fight back against the oppression, and maybe end up even saving her country or something, like in a trilogy. And maybe like Nico dying could be that motivation that sends her there, that gets her to get to that point. But either way, they have a really touching, very touching moment. And then, of course, I think it's around day 26, roughly. Finally, around day 26, the sea can is no longer going to be able to survive, and so she has no choice but to start thinking about how to make her baby survive. And I think at this point, Mia really truly becomes not just a mother but also truly becomes a woman, in the sense that now she is willing to sort of make that sacrifice for her family the same way that Nico has. And I think that she has finally come to terms and come to grips with the fact that she's probably not going to live. So now her main focus is not for her to survive but for her baby to survive. And she ends up building like this really cool little raft with like the Tupperwares and the rubber duckies and all these little things that she has access to, and she puts the baby in there. But she is pretty well at that point where she's saying goodbye. And one thing that the writers did that I thought also was very creative is that while they are out here, while her baby and her are floating adrift, and once the sea can sinks, she is sort of leaving like almost like little breadcrumbs of dead fish and guts and stuff, hoping to attract to let go of his coat. And that is essentially where Nowhere ends. Is a really beautiful story of a tragedy that happens during a tragic time. And so, really essentially at its core, what this is about Mia, like I said from the beginning of the movie, holding onto Nico's hand. It's about her being a very young, almost directionless, not really directionless, I shouldn't say that, but she's very young and, someone who's following her husband. He literally is guiding her, taking her by her hand, to them becoming almost like this warrior by the end of this movie, a survivalist herself who was, basically guiding her baby and holding her baby's hand and bringing her to safety the same way that her husband was. I even liked how so far through the movie they even changed her hairstyle. I thought that was very appropriate because once again it was very much like like a phoenix rising from the ashes type story. From this tragedy, a new woman emerges. She's no longer a caterpillar, she's now a butterfly. There's also a lot of biblical references here, and I think, like I said, I'm not 100% sure, so I could be ignorant to the Spanish culture, but I do think that a lot of places like over around Spain, like a lot of like European areas and stuff, I do believe that they are very Catholic. So like Catholicism is a very big part of their culture, is sort of their main religion and whatnot. So I can see why there were a lot of biblical references. You had a lot of references to like the tale of Jonah. He got swallowed by the whale and then ends up coming back up. You can sort of say that was almost like Mia's sort of like Mia's journey. Being out there. Obviously Noah, she calls her baby Noah, which is very reminiscent to the flood story. Of when the days of Noah's flood. And you can almost see sort of like the death and resurrection metaphor with Mia herself at the very end of the movie, how she's underwater, she's basically unconscious, you could say, sort of died, but then she's brought back to life, and she's pulled up out of water, almost like a baptism, almost like a resurrection type metaphor. But overall, I really thought that the story overall was very compelling for me, at least, and I thought it was very unique. There's a lot of these types of movies that are very small, very well grounded, that take place in one type of setting, and they just don't do a good job with it. And they're one example of that, I think, would be something like Quicksand, the movie Quicksand. And I actually didn't think that movie was as bad as what a lot of people did, but it's certainly not as good as this one. I don't think that I do think that Quicksand had a lot of potential, but it really fell short. But for me, with this movie Nowhere, I think that this one really stuck the landing. It had really great characters, really great performances, really great editing and directing, and writing as well. And they did a really good job at showing what Mia and Nico were running away from. And then, like I said, it's sort of like jumping out of the pan and into the fire, so to speak. She ends up, trying to leave this war-torn country, and then ends up in this even worse situation out in the middle of nowhere. And so, like I said, I would love to see a sequel. I would love to see Nico's story and see Nico's perspective. I would love to see them end the movie, and I mean like they should end like literally the final scene of the movie. Give him a movie that's like an hour and a half long, and let the very last scene before the credits roll be him calling Mia, and I think that that would be so cool and so effective, and then that would make this first movie be even more impactful, and it would really be a really cool story, I think, to explore. I personally would like to see it be a trilogy, but they don't have to do a third movie if they didn't want to. They could just leave it at two, but I think it would be really cool if we had a whole trilogy based on Mia and Nico, and eventually Noah. They could even do one with Noah, and it would be cool to see where Mia and Noah ends up later on. And it wouldn't even have to be a drama. They could just do like a simple movie or something like that. But I definitely would love to see Nico and his story. His could be full-blown action. You know, it could be very much like sort of like a man on the run sort of type of movie. You know, where someone's on the run, trying to escape law, trying to escape the authority, trying not to be captured by the regime, but then unfortunately ends up failing. They could if they did it right, they could end up making that story be very compelling, because they could have it where he almost escapes, where he's literally at that final moment about to be free like Mia, but then ends up getting captured and ends up being shot. So I'm very curious to see if Netflix would be willing to do that. I don't think they will. I don't think that there's any plans whatsoever for Nowhere, or to flush out Nico's story. I never actually looked though. Let me see. Will there be a Nowhere sequel? Let me just see if Netflix would do that. I don't think they would, but it would be cool if they did. Let me see. It would be cool, like I said, it would be really cool to see if they did something. No, I don't think so. I don't think there's any. I don't think that there. No, I don't see anything there. There don't seem to be any future or anything for this franchise. But it would be cool to see it. Anyways, I would love to see Nico's perspective. But all in all, I really love this one. I really like Nowhere. I do think it's a great one-off, even if they don't continue the story. It's a great fun watch. You know, it's an hour and 40 minutes roughly, and it was really cool. I thought it was really creative. I thought it was something that was really fun. I've actually seen it 3 times now. Like I said, I actually have the reaction over on Patreon now, so if you wanted to watch it over there with me, you absolutely could. But overall, I had a lot of fun. So that's pretty well my breakdown and my sort of really in-depth discussion about Nowhere. Like I said, I do hope we see another one, but if not, that's okay too. It's a great one-off and all that good stuff, and that's pretty well all I got. So let me know in the comment section below if you've seen Nowhere, and if you'd like to tell me why or why not. If you like this video or this podcast, subscribe, follow, all that good stuff, and that's pretty well all I got. So until the next one, take care.